During the early morning hours on Friday, November 18th, 2011, the Caughlin Fire burned rapidly through southwest Reno. Immediately after the fire, the Living with Fire program interviewed firefighters and homeowners about their experiences during the fire and how windblown burning embers played a critical role in the loss of structures.
Michael Klug, the Fire Management Officer with Nevada Division of Forestry, and I was here on the Caughlin Ranch Fire with the Sierra Front Incident Management Team. The situation that we were faced with was a fire started up in the hills above Reno, and we'd had 60-mile-an-hour sustained winds for the entire day for that evening and then into the next day. The fire came down Alum Creek drainage here. As you can see, there's houses on both sides. So we had this long fire coming down this drain. It was extremely intense with the high winds. It was blowing embers everywhere. And as I said, everywhere an ember landed, there was something that burned, it would burn. And this would include, juniper trees and other flammable ornamentals that were not even near the fire front, but off into somebody's yard. It might be surrounded by green lawn, and an ember would reach out, get into that ornamental, that flammable ornamental, catch it on fire, and then spread into the house. And some of these houses were not impinged on by the flame front, but they were burned down by spot fires.
I'm Craig Harvey, Operations Section Chief with the Sierra Front Incident Management Team. The first video was off of Ridgeview Drive about 6:15 in the morning on initial attack. We had heavy winds, 60 to 80 mile an hour gusts, and it was blowing along the south side of Ridgeview and jumped the road into the fences behind all the houses, and it did ignite. A couple of the houses were damaged in that area. The second video is off the top of Windy Way, where we did have one lost structure and another damaged structure, and that one jumped the road at Lakeside below it and ran up the hill into the ornamentals on the junipers around the house, and that ignited and lit the roof on fire.
What would you say, I guess, how did embers contribute to the loss of homes in this fire?
The embers will find their way, especially with this amount of wind, the embers will find their way through any little attic vent, up in the eaves, any hole under garages will find its way in there, especially if the wind pushing it around, it'll get in there and usually ignite the structure.
And would you say that wind-blown embers, burning embers, were the major contributing factors in home loss?
Yes, it was. With the factor of the wind blowing, if we didn't have the wind blowing like that, we wouldn't have had the situation that we have.
What was the ember activity like during the fire?
They were just flying around everywhere, and especially when these large cottonwood trees down here caught on fire, it was like a tornado of embers that was, I would say maybe 100 feet wide, that would swirl around, and then as the wind would blow it, sometimes it would come over the house, other times it would go over toward Manzanita and start some of the vegetation over there on fire, other times it was heading back down. It was just all over the place.
Fortunately, the power did come back on about 3 o'clock, so we were able to use the hoses, and I watered down all the different brush between the house and this area, and to try and make sure that if the embers did blow back in, that they'd land on a wet surface and put themselves out. But
you also did the roofs and the gutters.
The roofs and the gutters. The other thing, gutters a lot of times will get leaves and so forth in them, and so you want to make sure that they're wet down to make sure that if the amber does get in there, it won't take off on you, especially since it's right up against the wood framing of the home. We had shake roof here when we originally moved in. We've eliminated that now and gone to the fire-resistant shingles that make you feel a lot better when you see those embers falling on the ground.
Okay. And regardless of your tile roof, you still had some embers penetrate through.
Yes, in those winds, the 70-mile-an-hour winds, it was like a blowtorch, and the embers were blowing from the south and actually from the west. It was a swirling kind of action, and it succeeded in getting underneath the tiles that run up and down the hips where the roof turns the corners. And those tiles, when they overlap, there's a small gap underneath them that will allow an ember or debris to get underneath. And I think the combination of the winds and the embers continuing to be stoked, and perhaps some pine needles, all contributed to feeding the fire that was able to get underneath to a spot where it could build up, eventually get into the space that is like an attic, but it's primarily duct space, and concentrate and burn through the plywood on the roof and get into the structure. So we have structural damage, but again, nothing compared to what other people had. We're really fortunate and thankful to the firefighters for deciding that this was worth saving.
One of the astonishing things that I remember is a lot of the garage doors were left wide open. And basically what they're doing is they're allowing for all the embers from this incident to go into their garage. Not only these free-flowing embers, they're pressurized by a lot of wind, so they're going in all nooks and crevices. They're going into fuel storage areas, workbenches. A lot of people keep paints and all kinds of stuff. Everything in your garage is now exposed to a lot of sparks, embers, and coming in at a high rate of speed. So now they're going to go in there and they're going to kind of tuck themselves into those little corners and where the dust, the cobwebs are, the leaves. And it's evident now that may have been a factor in some of these homes burning down, is openings in their structure that allowed these embers to get in.
Are there any special considerations as a firefighter and a homeowner that you would take into account living in this area?
Absolutely. Number one, obviously the 30-foot clearance, keep my property clean, plants that will actually help prevent ignition of fires in high winds and wildland fires.
And how about the steepness of the slopes and the proximity of, I guess just the steepness of the slopes in these ravines and these homes that are positioned on the tops?
Well, this is personally what I call the Skyline Syndrome. It's a very deep canyon, very steep on both sides, and once the fire gets established in these canyons, it's impossible to safely put firefighters in the canyon. So we have to wait for the fire to come to us, and that usually means we meet the fire at people's backyard fences or at their homes, which is a very difficult situation.
Did you happen to see any issues of, I guess, improper building materials, siding, shake shingle roofs, things of that nature?
This area has some older homes in it, probably built in the 60s. There was a lot of wood shake roofs in those areas, and there were a lot of wood shake siding homes, and they became a factor in some of the decisions that were made on which homes we were going to try and save and which homes were basically a write-off. No matter what we did, we would not be able to save those homes. Grant, when the fire jumped to McCarran Boulevard, all 4 lanes, all 5 lanes, including the median, and started to get established in the canyon, it was clear that it was going to run this entire canyon. I had to make some tough decisions because I didn't have enough fire trucks to cover both sides of the canyon. Fortunately, the homes on the south side are built out of stucco and tile roof. They survived. Very few, I don't believe we had any home casualties or damage on that side. On this side, this is the older section of the canyon. These are mostly wood-sided, a lot of wood shake still in this area, and that's the decision I made. I thought we had the worst potential for losing homes here, and that's why we put the fire trucks. And they were able to save many, many homes in there because of that decision. Had we split those fire trucks, we probably would have lost a lot more homes in the older section over here.
And so given all things being equal, all these homes on the same slope, homes with stucco siding and tile roofs are going to be much less likely to ignite.
That is true. Absolutely true.
Okay. Any recommendations you have for homeowners living in Reno's fire-prone areas?
Well, everything's a fire-prone area, as this most recent fire showed, with embers blowing all over the place. It doesn't have to be the wilderness interface. It can be right in the middle of town with an ember blowing from up above. And yes, my recommendation is to educate yourself. Get on the Living with Fire website and learn the things that you can do. Some of the things are so easy to protect your own home and to protect your property just by clearing things up and battening down some holes in your house. And so that's my best recommendation, is to just learn.